Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everyone. We took last week off unexpectedly, so it's good.
You were quite the jet setter last week.
Yes, I was in the last couple weeks. I've been in Paris and I've been in Los Angeles, California, and it's a 9-hour swing time difference. So that was an interesting adjustment to go through.
Is that your excuse for your horrendous performance on Bill Maher? Is all the jet lag?
Well, I won't blame that, but I will say this: it was a contentious experience, and I feel like it was probably the most difficult possible scenario you could invent for me, in the sense that number one, white conservative guy up against African American lady, Hispanic congressman and comedian with a team of joke writers and an audience who will applaud whatever he says and boo whatever I say. And then 2 days before I'm supposed to go on, and look, I mean, I could have ended up just talking about Jeb Bush and Donald Trump, and that would have been fine with me. Obviously, this tragic, horrific shooting happens in Charleston, and the story somehow becomes the Confederate flag. So that is the milieu that I am introduced into. And
But Matt, you know how to navigate different cultures. You come here with me and we get along just fine. You know how to you know how liberals think and what makes them tick and how to push their buttons and to make them, oh, look at the smart conservative saying smart things, hooray. Um, so you deliberately chose not to play that game when you went on Bill Maher last week. You chose to go 3-on-1.
Oh, I don't think that's true at all, Bill, because what happened was the panel starts and literally the first thing that happens is, or maybe the second thing, but within 30 seconds of my being introduced, Bill Maher accuses my media outlet where I work, the Daily Caller, of sparking the shooting in South Carolina, which is
Well, it's even worse than that. He made it sound like that you control the entire website and you personally approve all the racist content there.
right. And here he said something. I mean, I'm paraphrasing now, but he said something like,
We said your website. He didn't say Daily Caller. He said your
it's like
website.
I look, and when he goes, I looked at your website and I saw some stuff on there about black people. And so here's the thing: like, number one, I do work at the Daily Caller, but I also write for the Telegraph, the Daily Beast, and the Week. And I'd been in Paris for several days, and I'd been traveling to LA. So it's not like I've been looking at the site. And in hindsight, I have no idea what he was talking about. Like, unless he thinks Rachel Solozal is black, we really weren't writing about black folks, other than just covering this horrific shooting like everybody else. So I don't even know what he was talking about, but I didn't want to say, what are you talking about? Because I hadn't looked at the site. I mean, it could have been for all I knew, there could have been a contributor who doesn't even work here, who wrote something controversial about Trayvon Martin, and he was about to put that on the screen. So I was just really taken aback and rocked on my heels. What is he talking about? And then I had what I thought was a pretty decent comeback, which is essentially to say, look, it's less absurd. It would be less absurd for you to accuse the Daily, or I'm sorry, it would be more absurd for you to accuse the Daily Caller of sparking this shooting than it would be for me to accuse you, Bill Maher, of sparking the shooting. I mean, you made an anti-religion documentary, and this guy goes into a church and shoots up the church. And of course, that became twisted into me. Matt Lewis believes that race had nothing to do with the shooting. Well, so that essentially, it's impossible to have the kind of nuanced, thoughtful discussions that you and I enjoy here, Bill, in that kind of an environment.
I think if I were you, I would have found a way just to pivot off of that subject. I mean, I just you got to lay ambush there, so that's a tough position to be in. Uh, but you just weren't operating off of your strongest turf on this subject. Uh, and you're also hampered by the fact that you're wearing that horrific picnic blanket shirt that is rocking the nation.
Right, and keep in mind, news is breaking. I think this is before the manifesto comes out, so not all the news is quite known yet. But look, I stand by. I think my point that I made about Bill Maher made a documentary attacking religion, and whether it's the shooting at a Sikh temple, whether it's the guy who shot up the Family Research Council, or whether it's a guy going into an African Methodist Episcopal church, Mother Emanuel in Charleston, it would be wrong of me to blame Bill Maher for inspiring these shootings at churches and socially conservative venues, just as it's wrong for him to accuse my media outlet with zero evidence at all, and it turns out, I think it was completely apropos of nothing, of somehow sparking this horrific, tragedy. This horrific.
See, if you, I hate to beat up on you after the fact, because I second guess myself after TV appearances all the time, but you neglected to mention the Sikh temple and the Family Research Council shooting.
No, I did bring up the FRC. I did bring it up. See, that's the other thing, Bill. I did bring up the FRC shooting at
another.
You
were conflating the Charleston shooting with it being in a church, and so that left you open to saying you are downplaying the race angle and playing up the church angle. If you just separate that completely,
right? No. There's
shootings.
There's
you
no
would have stronger ground.
I completely agree. But there's no doubt that in hindsight, there were. It's one of those things like, if I had it to do over, I would have said this. You can always second guess it, but when you're the guy outnumbered 3-1 with the audience, clapping, and by the way, I make my point, and I made that point about Bill Maher's documentary. For a second there, he's taken aback, and if you watch the video, he actually says, "You got me on that one." He's actually kind of conceding it, and then of course, Joy-Ann Reid totally undermines that point and cuts it off. So when you're sort of up against 3-1, you'll never get momentum, right? So like, let's say Mary Catherine Ham had been sitting next to me instead of Joy-Ann Reid. Mary Catherine Ham, or even if Ann Coulter had been on that segment at that point, maybe she jumps in and says, "Yeah, Bill, what do you have to say about that?" So it's a very difficult thing. Now, I did at other points I said during the conversation, I said, we should take the Confederate flag down. I completely agree. And I said, of course, race is the most important, reason that this happened. And I said, Bill, what about the guy who went in and shot up the Family Research Council? I brought all those things up at different points during our discussion, which lasted, I don't know, 5 minutes.
Once it gets out on Twitter, all that's mentioned is that 5-second clip, and no one reads or watches the rest of it.
Exactly. It's all the narrative. It's history will sort of remember, that soundbite, which is why I was very thankful that some of my conservative friends also wrote back and pushed, sort of made my point, because God knows it wasn't going to happen based on the liberal interpretation of it. By the way, let me say this real quick, Bill. Sorry to interrupt, but but that's what I do. Apparently, is just interrupt liberals all the time. One thing I will say is,
why are you silencing me, Matt?
I did have an appreciation for what like Ann Coulter and Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity for their strategy, because I went on that show and you get no credit for trying to be thoughtful at all, right? I made plenty of concessions. I really do believe that the Confederate flag ought to come down from state capitals. But you don't get any credit. Nobody watching that, or at least nobody commenting, none of my panelists, none of my co-panelists, there's no credit you get for being reasonable or thoughtful. So it's, in a way, you might, if you're going to get, I was essentially called a racist on national television, right? And if that's going to happen to you, then you might as well get the benefit of pandering to the right-wing base. And so I understand the calculus for why people like Rush and Ann just double down. They say, the liberals are never going to, they're never going to concede anything to me. They're going to try to misrepresent me anyway. I might as well go all in and at least have the conservative base love me. So,
Well, and that's good for selling books and for ratings, but I think as you are going to suggest in your upcoming book, that's necessarily good for conservatism writ large.
well, my next book is going to be Give 'Em Hell: How I Learned to Battle the Radical Left in America. A tale told by a former Republican squish who was radicalized by HBO.
I want to go back to your horrible shirt, though.
Okay.
Because you chose to not go in a suit and tie. You know, you do lots of other television where you do look a little more dapper. You went Hollywood casual for this one because you're in Hollyweird, wearing this sort of pale green checkered shirt. Now I want to sympathize because I was doing some MSNBC a couple years ago, and feeling like I needed to do something to kind of stand out a little bit more. I go to my local upscale men's shop in town and ask them for advice, and so they gave me this mafioso jacket. You can't really see it, Matt. Looking like I'm out of The Sopranos, which I wore on MSNBC once, and everyone that I knew was like, "No, don't do that. No, that's wrong." It's like, well, they told me to do it. This is a very respectable men's shop. They said this is going to work.
Yeah.
I
make no apologies for my shirt, Bill. I'm not embarrassed or ashamed. I am proud that I wore that shirt. I love that shirt, and I just recorded a mean tweets thing where I read the mean tweets. People hated the shirt. Some people liked it, but most people hated it, proving that it's not just women who get commented on. I stand by the shirt, and I'll tell you my theory. You alluded to it, Bill, but I'll tell you my theory as to why people did not like that shirt. And the theory is that the people watching that show would have preferred if I'd either been wearing a Confederate T-shirt, they'd have been okay with that, or if I'd been wearing the sort of Republican guy uniform, the blue suit with the red tie. Like, they didn't like the fact that I looked like that. You couldn't just look at me and tell that I was Mr. Token Conservative, right? Like, I wasn't wearing the Republican guy uniform. And I think that's what they resented, because this was an irrational hatred of my shirt, and that's what I think it was. I stand by the shirt. I like the shirt.
Now, what also made me disappointed at the whole real time episode is that I had read I've read the draft manuscript of your book. I know you have this very provocative chapter about the Republican relationship with the South that you articulated in a piece for the Daily Beast this week.
Yeah.
And I really wish that Bill Maher gave you the opening to talk about that, because that's some real interesting stuff that I don't think the Republican Party has grappled with. And they're barely scratching the surface now that there's this wave of calls for the flag to come down. But even just taking on the flag, it really doesn't get at the heart of what the Southernfication of the Republican Party has done to the party intellectually and ideologically.
Well, thank you, Bill. And my forthcoming book, Too Dumb to Fail, you can pre-order that now at Amazon or Barnes & Noble, and please do. I have a chapter that's tentatively called What the GOP Lost When It Won the South. And that's the title of my Daily Beast column yesterday, too. And I think you're right. I mean, I could have had that discussion if Bill Maher, if instead of beginning the conversation by accusing me and my outlet of sparking a shooting of a black church, which, of course, I'm going to defend my outlet, and it's like game on, right? Like when you begin the discussion like that, you end the possibility of us having a thoughtful, nuanced discussion. It's game on. Had he done it differently, I think we very well could have had a much more thoughtful discussion about this. And as you know, Bill, you've helped with the editing of the book in this chapter. I mean, basically the premise of the book is that conservatism started out as a very thoughtful intellectual philosophy, that it got dumbed down And then the last part is sort of how we can have our way to the future of winning 21st century Americans without giving up our conservative values and ideas. And in one of the middle chapters, I sort of look at, there's some modern trends that have caused the dumbing down of conservatism, right? Like cable news and Twitter maybe have contributed. But there's other trends that really, the seeds that were planted decades ago, and one of them would be the injection of Southern Democrats into the Republican Party when the Republicans won the South. Essentially, that changed conservatism. And I'll tell you one interesting thing. You can go read this column at the Beast. It's called "What the GOP Lost When It Won the South." And in this column, I deal with a lot of the superficial stuff because it's just frankly easier to write about superficial stuff, like these sort of optics. How can the guy in New York City who's ordering an Uber should be a conservative, but if he thinks, if when he thinks of conservatism, he thinks of Haley Barbour, like if that's the caricature of a Southerner, it's not going to be him, right? It's just not going to happen. But in the book, I also delve into some more substantive things, and one of the points I make in the book is frankly that a lot of the sort of Southern culture, never mind the racial aspect, which of course is something that Republicans are grappling with now with the Confederate flag, but just some of the sort of Southern culture is really unconservative. And there's an interesting study, I'd have to pull it up, but it's in the book. Basically, geographic lands where if herding, like if cattle herding was indicative to the part of the country you're from, you will be much more individualistic. But if you come from an area of the country that's more agrarian, you will be much more collectivist. And so the Southerners who like the pork and the farm bill and government, big government, the sort of the Mike Huckabee populism, really that actually goes back to the fact that it's an agrarian region. This is the kind of discussion or thing, Bill, that you could never talk about on TV. You'd never have the time to talk about this. But that's why you got to get the book, Too Dumb to Fail.
I mean, I would think that this notion, I mean, you guys are very careful. You don't want to be bigoted towards a region.
Right.
You don't want to say that if you are a Southerner, you are inherently not as intellectual as other parts of the country. And I'm sure that your argument will get oversimplified and misinterpreted
by both sides,
by somebody.
By both sides, yeah. Southern conservatives might hate this too, right? If they don't fully appreciate what I'm saying. And I love that. I think you and I, Bill, both probably have very mixed emotions about the South. I mean, there are things about it I absolutely love. There's a romance about it, a certain chivalry, the food, the blues music, whatever. There are things about it that are like amazingly cool, and then of course there's a much more darker, troubled aspect of it as well.
Right, and I think there was always hope on the left that through economic issues, the left could bond with the South and lift them out of their dark past. The whole Tennessee Valley Authority New Deal project was sort of
well, that's the part of the when Howard Dean says, that's the part that people don't remember, when Howard Dean says the guy with the Confederate flag on his truck should be voting for Democrats. The part that always gets left out is Howard Dean then says, because he's struggling with the economy and he's losing his job. There's an economic side.
I wrote about this a lot at the time. What he said was because they need health insurance and their kids need a good education too. Yeah. And when he first said that, it was at a DNC meeting with a multiracial crowd. He got a standing ovation because he said it in the proper context. Everybody got what he was saying. He wasn't saying that Confederate flags are awesome, let's all be racist. He was saying, look, there's people here who are in need, and we want to find common ground with them and get them on our side.
Yeah.
we don't want to dismiss people because we have a disagreement about this one subject, and once we can find that common ground, hopefully that can lead to bigger and better things. And then so he said that early in the 2004 campaign, and that was actually part of his rise because people thought, hey, this guy is thinking out of the box how to sell liberalism to other parts of the country. And then he kind of shorthanded it in an interview when he became the front runner, and he didn't didn't repeat the quote in its full context. Just saying, he just said, I want to be the candidate for the guy who has the Confederate flag on the back of his car. And this was at a moment when it was time to take the guy down from the other candidates wanted to knock him off his perch. And all of a sudden he became in the maelstrom of being
he was misrepresented.
as
I mean, the whole Dean Scream thing is another example. I mean, he was not treated fairly by the media. By the way, Bill, interestingly, I just spent some time with Howard Dean. I mentioned I was in Paris. I was over there. There's this somewhat controversial group of Iranian dissidents who brought me over. Full disclosure, they paid for me to go over to cover this conference that they had, this rally. Tens of thousands of Iranian dissidents and opponents of the Iranian regime were at this thing. And the speakers included people like Howard Dean and Woolsey and like the former, head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the former Marine Commandant. It was really a who's who.
Yeah, I mean, there's been controversy about that Dean has been seen as a bit on the tape.
Yeah, well,
for backing this group.
Clearly, I don't know. I don't know what he gets paid, or it's a very distinguished bipartisan group of people who went over, and I assume that they're not just getting free trips. I don't know the details of that. This organization paid for me to go over there to cover it. I ended up extending my trip, on my own dime. So if you see pictures of me in front of the Eiffel Tower, that was not them paying for that. But anyway, the cool thing was I got to spend a little time with Howard Dean, and he made some really interesting remarks. And one of the things he said was, he goes, he said this on stage. He says, I was right about the Iraq War, and I was just the governor of Vermont. And he's like, if I knew it, why didn't all these so-called experts know it? So I asked him, what did you know that they didn't, and how did you know it? And he told me that the reason he knew more than everybody else in America was he gets his news from The Guardian and like the Telegraph. In other words, he reads British media outlets, and according to Dean, they were publishing intelligence reports that nobody in America saw, and that like the New York Times was not publishing these intelligence reports. And so I just found that to be, I don't know if this is old news to you, Bill, but that's Dean's argument for how he knew what he knew at the time.
No, I don't remember. I had not heard him say that specifically before, but it does bring up this whole notion, if we can pivot to 2016, there's this line in Republican circles now, particularly those who are championing the various governors that are running. We made a mistake. We tried the guy with no experience who had been in the Senate for a couple of years, and what a disaster that was. Everything fell apart. We need someone with real experience again. Yada yada yada. And I've always found that the experience argument almost never flies in and of itself, because people are much more interested in what do you believe and what are you going to do, and wanting to see how you articulate it, how you back yourself up, as opposed to just your resume, because there's plenty of people out there with long resumes who still get it wrong, still make the wrong call. Obviously George Bush was, and so Obama had this extra ability to make this case because George Bush was surrounded by supposed leading lights of conservative foreign policy circles who totally botched everything. And so when McCain tried to challenge him in the debates, and Obama seemed like he was on firm intellectual ground and didn't seem flustered by what was being thrown at him, people felt confident that he knew what he was talking about, despite having only been in the Senate for a few years. So now you have, on the Republican side, Jeb Bush leading the pack barely as sort of your more experienced candidate, but Donald Trump can just show up with having no experience at all and give a blustery press conference and then jump up to be number 2 in the pack, at least according to the most recent Fox poll and one of the New Hampshire polls. So it seems like even in Republican circles, even though it's sort of fun to knock Obama on his resume, there's still an element that gets excited when somebody just as good on the stump, you don't really care about what the resume is at that point.
I think Ted Cruz is right, although it's a very self-serving argument, which is to say, I don't think it's Obama's inexperience necessarily that was the problem. I think it's his attitude in terms of not reaching out to members of Congress and not just in a bipartisan manner, but even within his own party. And I think it's also, and maybe you could argue that comes from experience, that if you've been governor of Arkansas like Bill Clinton was, that maybe you've learned the lesson that you have to do that. So maybe there's some experience there. It's not a knowledge problem. But the Ted Cruz argument basically is that it's Obama's leftism that's the problem, not his inexperience. Now, that's a very self-serving argument. I would say this to Republicans. Guess what? Barack Obama got elected twice, number 1. So maybe we should do that. If you're a Republican, maybe copy that, right? This inexperienced guy managed to get elected twice. So number 1, he also managed to pass some pretty liberal Obamacare. We'll see what happens with the Supreme Court. We're not going to talk about it because we don't know what's going to happen before this thing airs.
Oh, by the way, I am watching the SCOTUS live blog right now. They just announced a fair housing opinion, which is actually a pretty big case that hasn't gotten talked about as much as Obamacare. And Kennedy sided with the 4 liberals to uphold a more liberal reading of the Fair Housing Act, to say that it doesn't matter what your intention is in regarding housing discrimination. If there's a discriminatory impact, that's a violation of the Fair Housing Act.
Now, this is not,
to
be clear, this is not Kennedy from MTV. This is Justice Anthony Kennedy, I think.
That's correct.
Okay.
So once again, Kennedy riles conservatives, sides with the left. Is this a harbinger for the Obamacare decision? Nobody knows. Kennedy is very mercurial.
You cannot read the tea leaves, my friend. You'll get burned every time. We've seen that happen time and again. Not you, because it's your political prognostication, not your Supreme Court prognostication that's come under question here on this show. But just as a rule, I don't think we can do that because we all thought that what was the case where I forget, there was a very high profile case. I don't think it was Obamacare where
which was a surprise too.
Yeah, maybe that's what it was. But anyway, back to what were
you were saying Obama got his stuff done.
Oh yeah.
Got a lot done despite not having a ton of traditional experience.
And he got Obamacare passed, right? So if Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz or Rand Paul, without a whole bunch of experience, replicated what Obama did, just the right-wing version of it, you could do worse, right?
But is it going past the specific experience issue? Is it unnerving that you talked about when Rubio had his announcement that it was a really good announcement, good rollout, got a good bump in the polls afterwards, but that bump has faded. Cruz's bump has faded. Trump's getting his bump. He just announced, so it may well could fade again quickly. But we seem to be having the same kind of cycle as 2012, where everybody gets a little bump and then it fades, and the guy who has the establishment backing just kind of grits his teeth and muddles through and still gets it because the conservative factions can't just consolidate around an alternative. And now Bobby Jindal's out today. I don't know what people are saying about his announcement. I imagine not much. But
Jindal mania sweeps the nation, Bill.
It doesn't seem like these role announcements are amounting to very much. No one has figured out on the right how how do you do what a Howard Dean did or Barack Obama did, where you don't just get a bump, but you drive the entire debate for months on end with a real cutting idea, a potent position that distinguishes yourself from the pack. Rand Paul came out with a flat tax piece a few days ago. Nobody cares. I feel like every 4 years a Republican tries to embrace the flat tax.
Well, it also had a value-added tax component, which was amazing to me, because I think that's something, having been in France, I don't think it's something that conservatives ought to be supporting as a vet. And it's sort of a hidden tax. It's not just a consumption tax, but there's a lot of like hidden stuff baked into the cake. And it also just opens the door. That's why I was against the 999 thing, because the odds are you're not gonna actually replace the income tax or corporate tax. You're just gonna add another tax. So anyway, that's me on my soapbox a little bit. But look, the experience thing, it is hypocritical. I mean, there are plenty of Republicans who are like going to support Ted Cruz, who spent the last 8 years talking about Obama not being experienced. But I don't think it really matters that much. I don't think that's going to be like a definite, a compelling argument that would stop them. I mean, there'll be other things that probably stop Ted Cruz from winning the nomination, but I don't think it's going to be just that one.
While you were talking, the healthcare decision was announced. It is 6-3. Chief Justice writing for the court, holding subsidies are available. Individuals who get their healthcare through an exchange established by the federal government will be eligible for tax subsidies. Obamacare wins again.
Wow. Well, but maybe, this is like instant prognostication, but conventional wisdom, of course, is that this is good for Republicans, at least politically, electorally good for Republicans. So, silver lining.
Well, I think if the subsidies lost, I think the pressure on the Republican states to have reinstated those subsidies would have been enormous. I don't think it would have taken down the whole law.
6-3. I'm sorry to interrupt.
So that must mean that Kennedy and Roberts, so Roberts, Kennedy, Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, Kagan.
So I'm already seeing Ben Shapiro, conservative commentator. No need to wonder whether Chief Justice Roberts was a disaster pick. He was, and yes, I told you so at the time. Let me just say this: Ben Shapiro. Say what you will about the guy. I like him personally. Don't always agree with him politically. But Ben Shapiro wrote years ago, before Roberts ruled on anything, I think when he was a nominee, that Roberts would be a disastrous pick and that he would not be conservative. I'd have to revisit it. But Ben Shapiro, he deserves credit, if you're a conservative, for spotting this. I don't know how he did it, but he was against Roberts from day one.
Well, I mean, if I'm a conservative, I have I don't think that you judge judges based on the immediate political impact of their decisions. I mean, this is a case that's not about whether Obamacare is good or bad. This is a case about how do you interpret the statutory language of a complicated law. And again, I haven't read the opinion yet, of course, but there was a case that Scalia ruled on just this year where he said you don't look at one line of a law in isolation, you look at the whole law. That's not a constitutional matter. It's just a question of how do you interpret laws. And it's pretty commonplace to discern congressional intent when deciding how do you interpret language in a law, because people can interpret language in all sorts of different ways. And so for Roberts and Kennedy to use that logic, assuming that's what they're using, I mean, they're obviously not, I mean, whatever they are using, it's not some sort of grand constitutional argument, because again, it's not a constitutional case. That doesn't say anything about his innate conservatism. He's still pushing pretty hard, I think, on things like eradicating affirmative action from the legal books.
No, but I think
that might be a very big conservative legacy.
Yeah.
That he doesn't want to upset by doing a hack opinion just because it would appease the right wing base, in an election cycle.
Well, look, you may be right that he's decided this is not the hill I'm going to fight on, and I need to give on this one so I can set precedent on other things. But I think it does speak to a sort of a fundamental problem, which is it's not about like, he's our guy, we nominated him, so he should be voting for us. That's not what I would want. But it would be that conservatives have spent decades talking about people who are originalists, who will interpret the Constitution. And here you have a guy who, the letter of the law said one thing, and Roberts is not sticking strictly to the letter of the law. Let me, by the way, Jonathan Martin here. I'm just scrolling through the tweets. Jonathan Martin from the New York Times tweets, "Now cometh the worse than Souter comparisons from the right. #Rhino." So that is what John Roberts. So it's funny, both Bushes now with their picks, both Bush presidents.
But I think that's a totally unfair comparison. Roberts has made a lot of conservative rulings. He's by and large sides with Scalia and Thomas and Alito.
But on the things that really matter, this is the issue of this is the dominant issue of the Obama era legislatively, his biggest legislative accomplishment. And I mean, again, it's not that a Republican nominee should vote against something that his Democratic successor puts in. But Roberts, again, the first time around, Obama said it wasn't a tax, and Roberts says, oh, it is a tax. And now this time around, the law specifically says something, and Roberts is saying, yeah, but that wasn't the intent. Or again, he's not really.
This is the question of conservatives getting, I think, hung up on their own talking points. The judge's job is not, to discern dueling political talking points is to look at the law in and of itself and the Constitution in and of itself. So it doesn't matter that Obama says as a political argument this is not a tax. As a literal matter, it's being administered by the IRS that it's part of their taxing authority. You want a judge to not be trapped by the political noise. You want the judge to cut through that and deal with the law itself. And this is what conservatives say that they want. That we just want someone to call balls and strikes. We don't want activist judges are going to do. We want to do what they want to do.
No, but calling balls and strikes, and it is funny how we got totally like this has taken over the show now. But calling balls and strikes would be literally interpreting what the law says, like not writing the law. And not deciding.
But people interpret words differently. That's why we have the Supreme. If it was so obvious all the time, you wouldn't even need a court.
This law specifically said that states who set up their own whatever would not be eligible for the subsidies. That's the letter of the law, right?
But it doesn't make you pause for a moment that there are 6 of the 9 judges spanning from Ruth Bader Ginsburg to Kennedy and Roberts who said that's not how this law should be interpreted because that does not take into account the entirety of the law. It doesn't make you think, maybe that talking point wasn't the entire argument. Maybe I should read the opinion.
Well, Bill, now you've gone too far. If you're suggesting I need to read one of these opinions, I will not sit here and have you suggest something like that. Howard Kurtz tweets, does Obama invite John Roberts over for popcorn and a movie? Second time the Chief Justice has saved Obamacare.
That's true. Look, I was one of the most virulent opponents of John Roberts at the time. I was talking on Air America Radio, railing against him when a lot of Democrats had thrown in the towel. I thought that was a massive mistake to let that go without a fight. He probably got confirmed anyway. But I had deep suspicion of him, and look, by and large, I still do not like him. I don't agree with sort of his basic constitutional philosophy, but you have to acknowledge. I mean, I think this is not just a testament to him as a person, but to the system. I mean, the whole point of having lifetime appointments on the Supreme Court is so they don't become political hacks, because they take a long view. They don't respond to political pressures. And John Roberts at least proved that he is following his own compass. He's not under Obama's thumb. He's not under Rush Limbaugh's thumb. He's doing his own thing, doing what he thinks is right, and that's the best you can hope for in a justice.
All right. Well, I would first of all, the show completely derailed by this decision. I think I need to go write something on it, and I'm guessing you probably did too.
Well, I want to talk about one other thing though before we go though, because I had a big piece in Politico this week called "Liberal is not a bad word anymore," and this is sort of a long time topic for me, going back to my earliest days as a blogger, calling my own blog "Liberal Oasis." How do we define the word again in a way that's appealing to people? Because it obviously been beaten into submission, going back into, the nadir of the Mike Dukakis campaign of 1988. And there was a great hope, of course, that with Obama's election, that there would be that there would be a liberal resurgence, that we would be able to recalibrate the nation ideologically. And some people on the left thought Obama was falling down on that. He was echoing too many Republican talking points. He was making too many compromises. He was being too obsequious to congressional Republicans. But there is some evidence in polls now that people are more comfortable calling themselves liberal, particularly when it's described as socially liberal. It's not quite as you're not seeing the same kind of bump in terms of economically liberal, although economically conservative is not doing all that hot either. And you do see a bump up in just being called liberal in general. In the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, they found a bump of 4 points, and conservatism had dropped a little bit more than that. So these polls, can slosh around a bit. Generally speaking, when people say liberal, moderate, conservative in polls, going back 5 decades, it's pretty stable. It doesn't actually move around very much. So in that respect, liberal moving up 4 points is sort of within the bounds of where it kind of bounces up and down. So in and of itself, that doesn't tell you too much. The bigger, and you do see a lot, conservatives love to say more people call themselves conservative than liberal, which is still true today. That hasn't changed. But it leaves out moderate, because moderate's still the plurality, almost always is the plurality. And the real deeper question is, are moderates more comfortable overlapping with liberals than they are overlapping with conservatives these days? And I don't want to get every last argument in the piece in Politico, but I think there is a correlation between liberal pride and moderate overlap with liberals, that it doesn't make moderates recoil to see liberals proud of their own beliefs. It makes it more appealing that, hey, you're not ashamed of yourself. Maybe you got something going on there that I want to go check out. And so I think this is, to the extent that you're buying the argument, Matt, and I don't know if you are, it raises questions how Republicans should run in 2016. You have the case in the midterms. There's an argument from Peter Weiner in the New York Times. Well, conservatives are rocking the midterms, so this means that Obama is just sort of like a personality cult, and it's not really a big shift nationally. But midterms almost always do better for the out party. Larry Sabato in Politico a few months ago said, two-term presidents traditionally empty the benches for their own party on all the down ballot races. And that happened with FDR, it happened with Reagan, and that didn't mean they weren't transformational presidents that moved the country ideologically. I think a bigger warning sign for conservatives is that Cory Gardner race in Colorado, where he had to run pretty moderately, even left in some cases when it came to clean energy and immigration and birth control, to win in a swing state. You don't have a lot of examples of diehard conservatives winning in swing states in that 2014 midterm. That might be part of the discussion for your side. How do we succeed on the 2016 map? Do we need to moderate to win in these purplish states? If the winds are blowing in the opposite direction, do we got to do a Bill Clinton big government is over sort of, jiu-jitsu to get by?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the real question. It feels like the world, or the country at least, is moving leftward. Um, it feels that way. I will concede, I guess, is it Peter Wehner? We do not know what happens in a general election when Barack Obama is not on the ballot. But it does, number one, I think if you're a conservative, it's safer to assume that you have to fight hard than to assume that it's going to be like the midterms, because it's not going to be like the midterms. Is this something like the Reagan era that lasted a generation, where, again, Bill Clinton can win, but he sort of has to, run as a new Democrat to win? Is this the bizarro world of that, where Republicans can only win if they sort of tonally run, appealing the way that a Southerner like Bill Clinton could appeal to the center? Can only a Marco Rubio or a Jeb Bush kind of win in this environment? Or is this just a blip, an anomaly, something temporary? That's the huge discussion taking place. As you know,
and I don't think it's something that you can definitively determine today. Look, if this was 1927, you would think Calvin Coolidge is rocking this.
Right.
The economy is gangbusters. We got majorities in the House and the Senate. Things are looking good. And if you were Democrats in 1938, the recession just happened. The FDR tried to purge your party of conservatives. It totally backfired. Things did not look very good. You can't. There's always fluctuations within a 2-year presidency, in FDR's case longer.
Absolutely.
And the final judgment on Obama is going to be after he's out of office. How does the economy do? How does foreign policy look? Reagan didn't win the Cold War in 1988.
That's right.
The wall came down after he left.
That's right.
And then everyone credited him for it.
1989, I think.
Right.
So I'm joking there, because I know he wasn't president when he won it. As you know, too dumb to fail, my argument is that it's that in the 21st century, you have to have a little bit of a conservatism. You need to preserve the fundamental foundational ideas and values of conservatism, but they need to appeal to changing demographics. So that's sort of what the book is arguing. So maybe it's a little bit of a middle way. I'm not saying that we need to become more liberal or progressive. Well, it depends on what you call progressive. But I'm not saying we need to go to the left. I'm saying, but I am saying that the demographic shift, means, for example, the Texas swagger of George W. Bush, a harder sell probably now than it would have been before. Not to say that it can't happen, but whether it's stylistically or temperamentally or whatever, that there's a way to win for conservatives to win, but you do have to sort of rethink how to go about that.
Well, I'm going to leave it on this tweet from Alex Seitzwald, the Obamacare ruling, a big win for Obama and Republicans who now don't have to scramble for a replacement and can just bash it.
All right.
Or should I leave it on the note of that you just tweeted this out from the Roberts opinion? Congress passed the Affordable Care Act to improve health insurance markets, not to destroy them. If at all possible, we must interpret the act in a way that's consistent with the former and avoids the latter. Section 36B can be fairly read consistent with what we see as Congress's plan. That's the reading we adopt. So like I was saying before, he adopts the congressional intent argument in interpreting the law.
All right. Well, let's leave it at this, which is read Bill's Politico piece about liberalism. Read my Daily Beast piece about the South and Republicans. Pre-order Too Dumb to Fail at Amazon. Follow us on Twitter at DMZ Show. On Facebook, twitter.com/DMZ show. And may God be with you, and God bless America.
Take care.
All right, bud. Thanks.